What's up, YouTube? I wanted to make another video for porn, and just specifically on porn, and maybe sexual immorality as well. One of the things that I've thought about with porn is that, when you look at porn, one is you're, overstimulating your brain, and you're not going to get that person that you're looking at. You're not going to see a random video in porn and then, have a knock on your door and like, hey, let's do this together, or something like that. 9 times out of 10, I know there's probably some crazy scenario where, that could possibly happen, but anyway, I think that's one of the things about porn is that it's making you believe something that is not true, especially as far as, you're just possibly sitting by yourself, or maybe you're with a partner or whatever, but either way, most likely you're just by yourself, and you're not really there with that person. And so I think that's one of the things that is, just strange about porn when you think about it. I think another thing is that, porn, a lot of it is, really immoral, especially when you look at some of the, scenarios that are placed in porn, like, a boss sleeps with their employee, or a daughter with her dad, or, a sister with a sister, or all the different crazy scenarios that, is actually crazy. And so I think that's the one thing about porn is that it takes sex, which is, as far as this time and eternity is permitted, it's a thing that is to be between a husband and a wife, and then it distorts it. So it's not only like, oh, I'm watching, 2 consenting adults, maybe married or something, having sex. No, it's all these different crazy scenarios that, one, you don't know if it's actually true or not. What if you are actually watching, a crazy scenario like, 2 sisters sleeping together or something, so it distorts, something that, is supposed to be between a man and a woman, and it brings you into, even more darkness. I think another thing about porn is that I think it really makes the brain a sexual thing outside of just your body. And so the thing about porn is that, it engages your brain, and obviously, most likely your body, you're doing things with your members of your body, body parts and whatnot, your sexual organs, obviously. But, I believe it turns the brain almost into a sexual organ where, you're now just, and now, let's say you're, done watching porn, and now you're at work or something, or now you're, driving in the car, and now you're really thinking about sexual things, and you're not necessarily even in that, setting. And so, one of the things that I was thinking is like, man, in this world, it seems like lust gets everybody. Like everyone seems to be affected, and it seems like, lust really takes over, where you are now, not just, maybe watching porn in private in your bedroom, but now you are engaging into, different sexual things that, at first you weren't necessarily open to it, but now you're in all of these crazy scenarios where you hear things like, a school teacher sleeps with her student or something. And, it's because lust, it seems like it is almost an unquenchable fire, and I think, all of sin is sort of, like that in a way, but, it seems like, now it gets even crazier, where you're, just overstimulated in regards to sex. And so you may not necessarily be physically in the mood for sex, but yet your brain is thinking about it. And you're like, I think that's how, people are doing things that they don't necessarily want to do. It's like, you don't necessarily feel like looking at porn, but your body is controlling you, where, I gotta turn it on. I got to, do this thing that I'm wanting to do, or I got to, see this particular scenario. Maybe you're searching a specific type of porn or something. And so, there are, I think, a number of reasons. I think, in general, if we were to sort of ask God, hey, God, why is this thing wrong? I believe, God has not just made up answers or something, of why something is wrong, where it's like, the answer he gives us is, maybe it doesn't make sense or something. I believe, God has real reasons of why certain things are wrong. And so, when we as people consider sin, we don't necessarily take into account, all the reasons why a certain thing is wrong. And maybe I didn't say that as well as I could, but anyway, sometimes I think the Bible sort of gives an explanation in maybe a form of a story or something of why a certain sin is wrong. And then I think also one of the things that the Bible does is just come from this is exactly what you need to know, without necessarily a huge explanation, like a whole book on maybe a specific sin like sexual immorality, where God goes into specific details of, explaining exactly all of his reasons of why a certain sin is wrong. I think the Bible comes to a standpoint of, at least partly, I think, it just sort of gives you a, roadmap on, what sin is and what, is not sin, and so I think it just tells you straight up. But, living in this world, I think we can definitely get an idea, when I don't know if it would be as easy, if we didn't necessarily have maybe the news today or something, or, people didn't tell stories or tell their neighbors about what they heard or something, it wouldn't be maybe as clear, because I think, people act one way in public, but not necessarily, going into what they may do in private. And so that being said, I think we can see, and definitely someone who has overcome certain sins, can give a good explanation too about, what they have discovered of why a certain sin is wrong. Obviously they can't necessarily give as good of an explanation as God or, as Jesus would. But, for example, we know adultery is wrong, from the very fact of, a simple way is, if you love your spouse, even if from a standpoint of someone who is sort of sexually immoral, let's say if you really love someone, and you have a particular person that you want to be exclusive with, I think even unbelievers experience that, when their spouse, finds someone else to be sexual with, it does hurt, and it you feel heartbreak and many other things, betrayal and all that. And so I think, porn has those same effects, is that, it has some negative aspect to it that I think a lot of us can't always see when we are maybe looking at porn. Maybe we, as people, I think just for sin in general, we see the pleasure side of it. And so we're like, oh, this makes me feel good. And so we ignore the negative side, or maybe even choose not to see the negative or evil side of what we're doing that, for us gives us pleasure. And so, there are a few other podcasts and videos that I've done on this topic that I try to go into a little bit more detail of how to overcome sin, if you're looking for more videos to watch. But one of the things that Jesus says is that when we first believe in Jesus, but also, when we know the truth and we continue following Jesus, we continue in his teachings, we will know the truth, and the truth will set us free. And so I think, knowing that is a revelation, because when we have a changed mindset on our outlook on knowing the truth of, wow, this thing that I'm doing is actually wrong and sinful, I believe that's part of what happens, is that, we now know, wow, this is wrong, instead of just having a mindset of, hey, I'll do whatever, kind of that I want to do in a way, and, whatever I, have a sort of inclination or have the ability to do, and so we know the problem with lust from the standpoint of other things that we see in the news. I've mentioned a few already of, inappropriate relationships, maybe with an opposite sex, or inappropriate relationships through just different scenarios that come across when a person doesn't have, the power of God to overcome these different scenarios. And I think another thing that the Bible really points out is that, it's possible that someone could just, look at porn and maybe not necessarily go into other sexual things. Maybe that's a scenario. But, I want to point out that the Bible points out that sin, progressively gets worse. And so, yeah, sure, maybe you're first starting off at, something that you feel is not really that bad. Maybe you're just looking at a naked person picture online or something. But then you start going to videos, and then you start searching for specific videos, and then maybe you start searching for even more raunchy videos, and then you start trying to find a person in, in your space or in your environment to actually have sex with. And then, maybe it grows into something else where now you're participating in, maybe a party where, people are just hooking up left and right. And, I'm just trying to paint a scenario of how, the Bible describes sin as progressively getting worse. And I think obviously one thing to note is the consequence of sin. In this world, if we continue to do certain things, there are different consequences. Maybe you, you find a spouse or something that, you find someone that you can hook up with regularly, and you're not married and you're just, having sex. And then, that person breaks up with you, or you break up with that person. One of the consequences, this is kind of a lighter one, but one of the consequences could be a broken heart, which that broken heart, whether it's in you or that other person, can lead that person or you into more sin. Maybe from that broken heart, now you start drinking alcohol more. Or maybe from that broken heart, now you start to do drugs. Or from that broken heart, now you try, finding someone else to hook up with and repeating the process, and it gets more and more complicated. Now, that was more of a lighter kind of consequence. But, as we know, there are, different scenarios that can come from, wrong relationships and, different things that come with, sexual promiscuity. Let's say you start looking at porn and, you're into, opposite sex attraction, but, over the years, you start to get more sexualized, and now you get into same-sex attraction. And if that grows, now you're having sex with the same sex. And so you progressively get worse and worse over time. And so in this podcast, I just wanted to try to paint a little bit of a picture of, different reasons of why porn is wrong. But I think a great place to start is the Bible. The Bible has many different places where it talks about sexual immorality. Jesus, he's talked about it in the Gospels. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 32, he said, "But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery." Matthew 15, verse 19 says, "For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander." And so these are just some of the passages that just mention sexual immorality. Let's see. Acts 15:20 says, "But that we write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from things strangled, and from blood." So that's a little bit of a verse where it mentions things, that Paul was, a group was writing to a specific church of things to stay away from. And so they mentioned sexual immorality among things offered to idols and things strangled. And so in that list was sexual immorality. Romans chapter 1, verse 29 says, "Being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers." Romans 13:13 says, "Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy." And there are so many other verses. 1 Corinthians talks about it. 2 Corinthians, Galatians 5:19. One of the first things that it mentions is sexual immorality. It says, "Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality." And so, how I like to put it, is that what I believe the Bible says is that only sex between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman, is permitted. So, anything outside of that is not permitted. So, sex with yourself, masturbation, I believe the Bible calls that sin. Sex with someone who is not your spouse, sex with someone who is married, but you're not married to them. If you go to Leviticus, God has a whole list of different sex between either family members or extended family members that is wrong. And the Bible has a whole list and goes into detail about even specific family members, like your aunt or your brother's wife, or it goes into different details like that. And so I like to summarize it as only married sex between a man and a woman is the only sex that we are allowed to have. And so I think that right now is the time to start fighting, but off, porn and all other sexual behavior that is wrong. And I think it takes time, but that's why I say, it is time to start now, because I can't necessarily give a time frame. Maybe you're a person that it's a, overnight thing where, you see that freedom overnight. Or maybe you're a person that has sort of been struggling for a while. And so I think that as you continue with Jesus, I understand him saying that eventually you will see freedom. And I believe Jesus talks about freedom from any type of sin. But in this podcast, we're just talking about sexual immorality and, trying to hone in specifically on porn. And so, one of the first things to do is to, one, put your faith in Jesus Christ. If you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in Jesus, then it's hard to really believe what God says about right and wrong. It's hard to really believe the Bible and, God's word to us, and what he says is sexual immorality. And so I think that is one of the main steps into, fighting off porn. And then I think the next step, I believe in practical things like maybe not using the internet if you don't need to do it for schoolwork or something, and you mostly use it for social media. Hey, take that extreme step of, signing off of your Instagram and deleting the app, maybe until you can, not engage with those things wrongly, getting off Facebook, getting off those outlets, getting off TikTok, all those things, because in those apps you can search for sexual things, and most likely it will come up with something, that is either porn itself or pretty close to it. And so I believe also in practical steps of, putting in a porn blocker on your phone, or Covenant Eyes. If you Google Covenant Eyes, that company, that ministry, comes from, I believe, a Christian perspective of different tips on how to overcome porn. And then, I believe also prayer. Maybe you haven't necessarily prayed about porn. There was a time in my life, obviously, that, there were certain sins that I never, even thought of praying to overcome. And there was a point in my life where I didn't necessarily have a definite knowledge of it being wrong. And so that was one of the big problems that I struggled with. And then, I think even when I knew it was wrong, I had more knowledge, I still found it hard to, really break free from some of these sins. And so I think prayer, starting your journey now with God, to walk with God, and, over time, I can't necessarily put a time frame on it, because, Jesus, when he talks about it, he doesn't necessarily put a time frame on it. But in my interpretation, I'm talking like that just because my personal experience was, how it took some time to even, not engage in certain sins for a longer period of time. Now, there was a moment in my life where I was sinning, probably every day, definitely every week. But, over time, that time period of not sinning increased more and more, where, I had more strength to overcome those urges and temptations within me to say, oh, I just want to look at porn and, engage in something sexual. And so, I believe these things do take time to overcome, but I don't think we should be in a perpetual state of this is something that takes time to overcome perpetually until I die. I don't believe that is the message of Jesus. I don't think that's what Jesus says. And I don't think you can find anything in the Bible that really speaks to that of, that constant, basically, God is okay with your sinning as long as you, believe in Jesus, And so I believe Jesus is offering us real freedom. And I think he says that we need to continue in his teaching. One of the things that Jesus taught was that, if you look at a woman to lust after her, then you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And so I think having those Bible verses, those teachings of God in our mind can really help us, especially, when we have that opportunity to look at someone with that lustful eye, then we know what Jesus said, and, then we can begin to resist it. And so, I didn't mention everything I wanted to mention in this podcast on porn, just because, I have a few videos already where I go into a little bit more specific detail about, a little bit more on what to do to overcome porn. I've mentioned it, but obviously the Bible mentions it. I think a great thing to do is, read through the whole Bible. I think one of the easiest ways to get through the whole Bible is to put it on audio. And if you have maybe an opportunity to do it while you're at work, then, you can put on the Bible while you're at work, or maybe an audio Bible while you're in the car. And there's whole playlists of the whole Bible, even on YouTube. And I think even when you get home and in your free time, maybe you have about 4 hours of free time. If you don't really have, anything as far as work or something to do, then take out that time to just listen to the whole Bible. I think if someone were to maybe not sleep or something, I think listening to the whole Bible takes about 3 days. And so you should be able to get through the whole Bible, I would say, maybe in a week or two, if you really, do the audio Bible version. I do think, reading through the actual Bible too, like with, having the book in your hand is good. But if you kind of want to, really get through the Bible faster, I think you should do the audio Bible. And so obviously that's pretty much, where I would get all my answers outside of maybe, the advice of, putting up a porn blocker or something, maybe using a flip phone, if you need to make calls and stuff. If you want to downgrade to a flip phone and, taking different steps like that, I think can be really helpful. And so thanks so much for checking out this podcast. Hopefully this was helpful to someone. I think that God is definitely able and willing to help us all. And I believe that we will see victory, even if maybe one day you sort of make a mistake and, turn on that porn again, even though I'm not suggesting that you do that on purpose or anything like that. But I believe, eventually, and I think God is even expecting us to reach that point where we no longer look at porn or have someone that we're sleeping with we're not married to. And so, thanks so much, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.